This video is sponsored by NordVPN, the Take's favorite way to stay safe online.
I feel bad for the amount of true crime that I consume, but women, we don't watch true crime, we study it.
True crime shows and podcasts deal with gruesome and traumatic murders in which women are overwhelmingly the victims. So why is the audience for these shows also overwhelmingly female?
Murder show, I'm gonna watch a murder show.
A study from Kelly Bowling found that true crime podcast audiences skew 73% women, and two of the biggest true crime series of the decade, Making a Murderer and Serial, were both created by women. To that you can add Casting John Bonet, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and the hugely popular true crime podcast My Favorite Murder, all created by women, and apparently for women. So are female viewers drawn to these stories about women being brutally murdered in part because they're imagining being that victim? Or do these shows provide women with a feeling that they're being educated on how to escape a killer, while connecting with communities of like-minded women who can support and care for each other? Here's our take on why today's true crime streaming and podcasting are doing more than ever to captivate female audiences, shifting their focus away from the male serial killer psyche and towards understanding a woman's experience of crime.
Women like us, women that have been attacked, women that are survivors, they keep their secrets to themselves.
But not any longer.
If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get notified about all our new videos.
Any notorious killer had so many news stories written about them. You can't turn on the television without a documentary or even a feature film being made about one of these people.
The two best-selling true crime books in history, In Cold Blood, published in 1965, and Helter Skelter, published in 1974, are stories driven by the terrifying details of violent crime and primarily focused on the perpetrators of that violence, delving deep inside the psyche of the convicted killers.
Look at me, boy. Take a good look. I'm the last living thing you're ever gonna see.
Journalist Tom Wolfe wrote that In Cold Blood was neither a whodunit nor a will they be caught. Instead, the book's suspense is based largely on a totally new idea in detective stories, the promise of gory details and the withholding of them until the end. And though co-authors Vincent Bugliosi and Kurt Gentry tried to use Helter Skelter to debunk the myth of the Manson cult as a mysterious group of 1960s anti-heroes, the book became the most popular true crime work of all time for a reason: the expectation that the reader would discover more about why Charles Manson was able to lead a group of seemingly normal young women to commit a horrifying ritual murder in the Hollywood Hills.
Are you sane? Sane? Yes. That's relative.
Morbid fascination with death is part of human nature, but this widespread obsession with the criminal mind in the late 20th century also reflected an anxious society, scared by constant news coverage of big city crime waves, televised PSA campaigns warning the masses of stranger danger.
You've probably all heard stories about boys and girls who got into trouble, how they went off with strangers and their families never saw them again.
And the rise of the American serial killer news story, beginning in the 1960s. This helped set the stage for true crime's surge in popularity during the 80s and 90s, and meant that authors like Anne Rule made entire careers off writing extremely intimate stories that put readers right next to psychotic murderers like Ted Bundy.
He liked slender co-eds with long dark hair parted in the middle.
Yet from a female perspective, there's another obvious reason why you'd want to understand a potential attacker's mind and methods. One 2010 study led by Amanda Vickery found that women will often consume true crime because such stories provide information that readers feel could help them avoid or escape from a potential attacker.
A lot of women listen to true crime because it's a way to kind of feel like you have control over the situation even though you don't.
The opening of Only Murders in the Building, a fictional show about true crime fans who start their own podcast and investigation, underlines this important difference in a male versus female perspective. While Steve Martin's character, an aging male actor named Charles Hayden Savage, feels comforted by all the eyes in New York City ensuring no crime can be committed without witnesses, Selena Gomez's Mabel feels those eyes as a threat that makes her constantly aware of her personal vulnerability to attack and imagining how she'd fight back.
All the eyes on you all the time. It's a place that makes you binge Dateline to find out how not to end up on Dateline.
The practical interest in how you'd respond if confronted with real-life crime helps explain why true crime works in the 90s and aughts shifted their focus toward investigative procedures. But in today's new era of true crime, there's a refusal to portray the perpetrators as cold, calculated geniuses. Many newer true crime podcasts and shows flip the old dynamic of the genre on its head, centering their story on the victims of real-life crimes and sidelining the perpetrator's perspective.
You humanize the victims. You really tell us these people had lives. These people that cared about them.
In the recent miniseries The Investigation, which dramatizes the 2017 murder of journalist Kim Wall, there is a deliberate choice to never show the killer's face, reveal his name, or glamorize his crime in any way.
Fordi det her ikke er en perfekt forbrydelse. Det er en klodset, klam forbrydelse.
Instead, we're given inspiring snippets of Kim's life and successes before her senseless death.
Det är hon som är de röda. Hon reste vitt och brett.
This new format defangs the killer and even moves the conversation away from women as victims to women as survivors, recognizing that in spite of the horrible crimes committed against them, they retain agency over their bodies and definitions of themselves, and should at the very least get to control how those crimes are talked about. The format is even being used to revisit older true crime tales, like in Ted Bundy Falling for a Killer, where the infamous story of Bundy is told by his relatives and those who survived him, resulting in an image of Bundy not as a brilliant and charming sociopath, as he's often been portrayed, but as a backwards misogynist psycho, a deranged person so outraged by the women's rights movement that he ravaged American women with violence and murder.
Being mobile was an important part of their being independent women, and this was a big change in the culture. And this, of course, is the time that the murders begin.
With these victim-centric portrayals, the self-educational aspect of true crime is that much more valuable, drawing in women and priming them for an intentionally informative experience.
I really like the angle that the stories are told from. It comes from a place of protecting yourself and standing up for yourself.
A victim-focused true crime story can also be cathartic for women who have lived through traumatic experiences, creating a strong sense of community for survivors and casual fans alike. It's no coincidence that the #MeToo movement started taking center stage around the same time as these grassroots true crime shows were reframing a storytelling genre about men dominating women, which had itself so long been reflexively dominated by the perspectives of men. The immense popularity of My Favorite Murder, the true crime podcast that launched 1,000 true crime podcasts, is predicated on this very shift in perspective from perpetrator to victim.
When you watch these shows, the true crime shows, and read the books, and you come at it from a place of empathy and understanding that this could happen to anyone you know, it could happen to you, the way it affects their families.
In Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark's book, Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered, the two hosts take tactics used to prevent violence against women and apply them to the workplace, personal relationships, and self-care, encouraging women to act as fierce advocates for themselves, rather than striving to be what society may have taught them about being a polite woman.
I think it's just kind of about you get to do what you want in this life and survive and thrive.
One of the podcast's running series of hometown murders enhances this sense of community by creating a space for the audience to discuss crimes that happen near where they live, shifting the focus away from serial killers of mainstream infamy towards more personal, often forgotten crimes that reveal problematic attitudes towards crime against women.
Willis Knight was arrested 6 months later. There's a brief mention of others involved, but no conviction or follow-up as to what happened to them. What the Rochester police?
Together, the listenership gets to see how the institutions that are meant to protect women often fail them, and that there is so much strength in self-education and community. A big part of why so many of us love true crime is the sense that we can keep ourselves safe in the real world, and that's just as important to do online. That's why I use NordVPN. Whether I'm researching historical crimes or downloading new documentaries, it's key to protect my internet use and keep my true crime findings secure by encrypting my data. NordVPN uses next-generation data encryption as well as blocking malware. It ensures that my data usage can't be tracked by anyone, but also gives me unparalleled freedom online, allowing access to web pages and downloads from other countries. I love it because it means I can stream true crime from absolutely anywhere. Click the link in our description below, nordvpn.com/thetake, to get 4 months for free, plus a discount on a 2-year plan. NordVPN also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's really no reason not to try it out. Happy true crime watching! Another reason true crimes have evolved to include fresh perspectives is due to the impact of Errol Morris's The Thin Blue Line, the first true crime documentary to play a part in successfully overturning a wrongful conviction.
Well, what do you think about whether or not he's innocent?
I'm sure he is.
How can you be sure?
Because I'm the one that knows.
This film set a precedent for what a true crime documentary could accomplish, and its influence can be seen in shows like Serial, Making a Murderer, and The Confession Tapes, which have all attempted to present new evidence or points of view in old cases as a way to address a miscarriage of justice.
The truth is a really hard thing to cover up for too long, especially in a case like this where it's just sitting there. The truth is just sitting there on the interrogation tape.
Meanwhile, in the United States, only 26% of detectives and 12% of police officers are women. And this lack of representation in law enforcement may help explain why these types of new true crime shows have found such an intense popularity with women. More than just satisfying everyone's desire to play detective, true crime provides a space for women to engage with crimes that overwhelmingly affect them, when the legitimate legal spaces have historically shut them out. Remarkably, this amateur sleuthing carried out by female true crime fans can actually turn into legitimate citizen law enforcement. Netflix's miniseries The Keepers tells the story of two former students who decide to independently look into the still unsolved 1969 murder of their grade school teacher, Sister Kathy Sesnick. They interview sources, go through old records, and follow leads, giving the viewer an up-close and personal perspective of a women-led investigation.
Abby set this up so that anybody who had information to share with us, questions, comments, could send information anonymously.
Perhaps the most famous of this new breed of detective in recent years is the late Michelle McNamara, whose research into the Golden State Killer became instrumental in building a case against him before he was finally brought to trial after 4 decades of being at large.
Geographic connections, DNA profiles, genealogy websites. The first time she called me, I thought, she knows her stuff.
So these powerful examples of citizen detective work go beyond just shifting the perspective of true crime entertainment towards women victims and actually challenge systemic practices. These types of grassroots true crime shows shine a light on how crimes committed against women are poorly dealt with by institutions, and how in many cases a woman's perspective can be necessary to find the truth. Netflix's Unbelievable examines the real-life case of rape victim Marie Adler, who was charged with false reporting after being pressured into recanting her initial testimony.
You've told us 4 different versions. At this point, regardless of what the truth is, the only thing we know for sure is that you have told us at least 3 lies.
The show's protagonists, Detective Grace Rasmussen and Detective Karen Duvall, take a second look at Marie's story and uncover striking levels of victim blaming and police officers who treat violence against women as over-exaggerated or falsified for personal gain. Shows like Unbelievable illustrate that a female perspective is valuable in and of itself. Women can draw on their own experiences to empathize, form a more complete understanding of the victim's situation, and become personally invested in the outcome.
You came here to worship, not to hear how crazy I've turned.
You don't sound crazy to me. You sound like someone who's been through a trauma.
Our surprise at the very idea that women might enjoy a genre so dark and gruesome as true crime reveals just how pervasive sexist and limiting ideas of women's genres are. The types of violence men tend to be victims of in real life and eagerly consume in film and literature, like brutal military conflict, are often portrayed as honorable or part of human nature. Yet a woman's obsession with the very real violence that happens to people like her in true crime is often seen as divergent or strange.
I love true crime, but a lot of women like true crime. What's wrong with me?
So if the question is why women seem to love true crime so much, maybe our response should be, why wouldn't women love true crime this much?
Women in particular like to think about something and understand it in order to overcome anxieties based around that.
This new wave of true crime has all the attention-grabbing elements of a good ghost story and all the informational elements of a groundbreaking documentary. And increasingly, these stories are being written, created, investigated, narrated, and directed by women, reshaping the genre from the gory dramatizations of old into a more nuanced social contribution, one filled with a larger diversity of viewpoints and a keen eye for problematic practices within the justice system.
When you tell your story to other women who support you and have been through it, we can do incredible things with that power.
This is The Take on your favorite movies, shows, and pop culture.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.